She booked the hotel rooms before she even asked if I was coming. She never asked. She just took my card out of my mother's purse and used it like a coupon she'd been saving for the right moment. And the moment she chose was the same week I was sitting on a beach 200 miles away, watching my son chase sandpipers into the surf like the world owed him nothing, because for 4 days it didn't. But let me back up. Because the beach is the end of this story, not the beginning. And if you're going to understand what happened in that hotel lobby, the screaming, the declined card, the way my sister's face must have looked when the clerk slid it back across the counter, you need to know how we got there. You need to know who these people were before they decided that my savings account was a family resource. My name is Natalie. I'm 36. I work as an accounts manager for a mid-sized property management company in a small city about 2 hours outside of Charlotte. I have 2 kids, Cora, who is 9, and Eli, who just turned 6. Their father has been out of the picture since Eli was a newborn, which is a sentence I've practiced saying without emotion because the emotion used to cost me too much. My sister's name is Bryn. She's 40. She lives in the same town as my mother, drives a car she leases, vacations twice a year on credit, and has spent the better part of the last decade believing that I think I'm better than her. I don't. I just balance my checkbook, and in my family that alone is enough to make you the villain. My mother's name is Carol. She's 68. She has silver hair, a warm laugh, and a deep, practiced inability to say no to Bryn about anything that matters. And then there's Marcus, Bryn's ex-husband, father of her 2 kids, Jackson and Peyton. Marcus lives locally. He and Bryn have one of those divorces that never fully finishes, where they hate each other at dinner and text each other at midnight. These are the 4 corners of everything that happened. My father died 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 12 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The kind of timeline that doesn't leave room for anything except showing up and saying the things you need to say before the window closes. He was 64. He'd spent 40 years as a general contractor, built houses with his hands, paid every bill on time, and died with a small but carefully managed life insurance policy that he'd instructed me, specifically me, to handle. He told me in the hospital, the last week of September, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and the carnations Bryn had brought and then forgotten to take home, he reached over and gripped my wrist. His hands were still strong. That surprised me. Nat, you're the one who'll do this right. Don't let it become a war. I took the folder he'd kept on his nightstand. Inside, the insurance paperwork, my mother's account information, a handwritten list of her monthly expenses, and a note in the margin that said simply, keep her comfortable. Don't let her worry. Bryn was in the hallway when I came out. She'd seen him hand me the folder. She said nothing that day. She waited 3 days until after the funeral to text me. Of course he gave it to you. He always thought you were the responsible one. Enjoy your crown. I didn't respond. Dad's life insurance paid out $91,000. I sat at my kitchen table with a spreadsheet open and a cup of coffee going cold, and I worked through every line. Medical bills that insurance hadn't covered. $28,400. Repairs on Mom's house. The furnace had been failing for 2 winters and the back porch had dry rot through the framing. $11,200. A used but reliable car to replace hers, which had 190,000 miles and a transmission that knocked every time she reversed. $7,800. Funeral expenses not covered by the mortuary package. $4,600. What remained after everything? $39,000. I transferred it into a savings account in my mother's name at her credit union. I set it up so she could access it but couldn't accidentally drain it. A structure she and I agreed on together. A withdrawal limit of $500 per week unless she called the branch. I also set up a monthly transfer from my personal checking account to hers. $275 a month. Enough to cover the gap between her Social Security check and what she actually needed for groceries, gas, and prescriptions. I had it automated. It went out on the 1st of every month like a utility payment. For 4 years without interruption that transfer went out. Bryn contributed nothing. She said she had her own household to manage. And she did. She had a lease on a 3-bedroom house with a hot tub she used twice and a kitchen she'd renovated the year before on a home equity loan she was behind on. She had her own expenses, yes. But she also had time and proximity, and a mother she saw 3 or 4 times a week, which meant she had leverage over how often I was included in things. Bryn used that leverage like a scalpel. If Carol invited me to Sunday dinners, Bryn would become suddenly unavailable for 2 weeks, which meant Jackson and Peyton didn't come either, which meant Carol sat in her house with no grandchildren and eventually stopped inviting me. Not because she wanted to, because it was easier to manage Bryn than to hold a line. I figured this out the same way I figure most things out, through the numbers. I noticed that Mom's invitations to me dropped off sharply in the spring, right around the time Bryn had asked me for $3,000 to cover a gap in her lease renewal and I'd said no. Correlation isn't always coincidence. I adjusted. Called Mom on Tuesdays. I drove up one Sunday a month. I kept sending the money. And I kept, in the back of my mind, a very clear accounting of what I was contributing and what I was being given in return. Every summer since I was a child, our family had gone to the coast. A rental house on a barrier island. A week of sunscreen and sand and card games on the porch at night, while the ceiling fans stirred the salt air. It was the 1 week a year that felt unconditional. Dad made it feel that way. He paid, he planned, he packed the cooler the night before and had us in the car before sunrise, and the whole thing felt like a gift he was giving on purpose. After he died, I kept the tradition alive. Not the same island, that felt like wearing someone else's clothes. But the coast, the week, the ritual. I found a stretch of beach 2 states south, quieter, less expensive, and I booked it the same way I booked everything. Early, carefully, with a spreadsheet. Last summer, I paid for 2 rooms at a family-friendly inn, one for me and the kids, one for Mom and Bryn and her 2. Total, $2,600. Bryn had promised to cover half. She sent me $400 via app transfer 6 weeks after we got home, after I'd asked 3 separate times. Mom paid nothing, which I understood. That's what the $275 a month was for, that's what the savings account was for. But this summer Bryn had a different idea. I found out about it in pieces, the way you find out about most things when people have been talking around you for weeks. The full shape of it came together later, after the damage was done, from my mother herself and from my cousin Dee, who had heard it from Marcus's girlfriend, who had heard it from Marcus. Here's what happened as best as I can reconstruct it. In February, Marcus had come by Bryn's house for the weekly handoff with the kids. Bryn was complaining about money, the lease, the home equity loan, a dental bill she hadn't budgeted for. Marcus made a comment, the kind of comment that sounds casual but has been sitting in someone's mouth for a while. Doesn't your mom still have Natalie's card? That's my card. She held my gaze. Mom has it. She agreed to use it. Mom doesn't have the authority to agree to that. Bryn tilted her head, the way she does when she's decided a conversation is over before it starts. You've been holding Dad's money over this family for 4 years. Consider it even. I looked past her through the kitchen doorway into the living room. My mother was sitting on the sofa with Peyton in her lap, reading the message on a birthday card. She didn't look up. I picked the confirmation off the counter, folded it once and handed it back. Have a great trip, Bryn. I gathered Cora and Eli. We said goodbye to Peyton. We drove home. That evening, after the kids were in bed, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and my phone and I did 2 things. First, I called my bank. I explained the situation calmly and asked to have the authorized user removed from the secondary account. The representative told me that because my mother was an authorized user, not just a card holder, the process required either a written notarized request or an in-person visit from both parties. It would take 7 to 10 business days. I didn't have 7 to 10 days of patience left for that account. Second, I opened a new account at a credit union across town. I transferred every cent from the secondary account into the new one. $1,950 from savings, $680 from checking. I left $11 in the old account, enough to keep it open, not enough to buy a tank of gas. Then I closed my laptop and sat in the quiet for a while. There's something clarifying about being stolen from before it actually happens. About seeing the plan laid out on a piece of paper, the number at the bottom, the assumption baked into every line that you won't notice, won't act, won't protect what's yours. It doesn't make you angry exactly. It makes you calm. It makes you very, very deliberate. I had already been planning our vacation. 2 months earlier, I'd found a beach town 4 hours south. A quieter coast, smaller crowds, a small rental cottage 2 blocks from the water that allowed a pet and had a screened porch and a pull-out bed in the living room. 4 nights. $440. I'd been putting $120 a month into a dedicated savings account since January. I had $560 set aside. I booked it. Cora didn't know yet. Eli didn't know. I put a sticky note on the fridge that said beach with a small sun drawn in the corner, and when Cora asked what it meant, I told her it was a surprise. She folded her arms and said surprises made her nervous, which is something she gets from me, and I told her this was the good kind. I told no one else. Not my mother. Not Bryn. Not Dee Dee, who loves me but cannot keep a secret past noon. June moved slowly. I worked. I picked up the kids. I cooked dinner and helped with homework and paid my bills and felt, every first of the month when the automatic transfer went to my mother's account, a complicated combination of duty and resentment that I was getting very tired of. On the 15th of June, I canceled the transfer. I sat in front of my laptop for 3 minutes before I did it. Not because I was uncertain, because I wanted to be sure I was doing it for the right reasons. Not out of cruelty. Not to punish. But because I had been funding a family that had excluded me and my children from its plans while treating my bank account as a shared resource. And that was not a situation that was going to change while I kept making it comfortable. Mom had $39,000 in her savings account. Money I preserved specifically so she'd never be in crisis. She had her Social Security check. She had Bryn 10 minutes away. She was not in danger. She was fine. I wrote her an email. Short. Mom, I've made some changes to my finances. The monthly transfer has been paused. You have savings and Bryn is close. I love you. Nat. She called within the hour. Her voice had that particular quality, the one that's been calibrated over decades to make me feel like the unreasonable one. What am I supposed to do without that money? The same things you've been doing, Mom. Your savings account has almost $39,000 in it. That's for emergencies. Being inconvenienced isn't an emergency. Silence. Then, Natalie, I don't think you understand how this affects the family. I understand exactly how it affects the family. That's why I'm doing it. She hung up. Bryn texted 20 minutes later. What did you do to Mom? I read it, set the phone face down on the counter, and went to finish packing. If this story is hitting close to home, if you've ever been the one who kept the lights on while someone else lived in the warmth, you are not alone. Subscribe to the Betrayal Files. New stories every single week for people who know exactly how this feels. The drive south took 4.5 hours. Cora slept the first 2. Eli narrated the entire landscape. Every truck, every billboard, every overpass. Like a nature documentary about highway infrastructure. We stopped once for gas and Eli insisted on a bag of pork rinds, which he ate 6 of and then declared disgusting, which is its own kind of perfect. The cottage was small and smelled like cedar and sunscreen, the lingering ghost of every family that had been happy there before us. 2 bedrooms, a narrow galley kitchen. A screened porch with a hanging chair that creaked when you sat in it. Cora claimed the hanging chair immediately. Eli claimed the twin bed nearest the window because the ocean is louder on that side, which he had decided as a fact before he had any evidence for it. We were on the beach by 4 o'clock. The water was warmer than I expected and the color of green sea glass. Eli ran directly into the first wave and came up sputtering and laughing with his eyes huge, and Cora stood at the edge with her arms crossed, calculating the waves the way she calculates everything, and then walked in up to her knees like she was completing a task. I stood behind them. Salt air. Sun on my forearms. The sound of water filling every quiet space. This is what I paid for, I thought. This exact moment. This is what 4 years of careful, deliberate, unrewarded responsibility was for. Not the resort. Not the oceanfront suite. Not the spa. This, a screened porch that creaks, a 6-year-old full of pork rinds and ocean water. A 9-year-old deciding whether the Atlantic meets her standards. My phone was in my bag. It buzzed twice before I turned it face down in the sand. Bryn and my mother had arrived at the resort that morning. The coastal Palm Grove Suites, 3 hours north of where we were, with an oceanfront pool and a seafood restaurant on the ground floor and a water park with 3 slides. Bryn had told Peyton and Jackson about the water park for 6 weeks. They had been counting down. What Bryn did not know, driving north on I-26 with her kids in the back seat and my mother in the passenger seat, was that the account she was planning to charge the remaining $2,400 balance to had exactly $11 in it. I know what happened at the resort because my mother told me 3 weeks later, in a conversation she initiated and I let happen because by then I was ready. The front desk was marble and cool and smelled like eucalyptus. Bryn had a rolling suitcase and a printed confirmation and the practiced confidence of someone who has never once considered that a plan might not work because she hasn't had to. She slid the card across the counter without pausing. The clerk processed it, looked at the screen, processed it again. I'm sorry, this card is showing insufficient funds. There's a remaining balance of $2,400. Would you like to use a different form of payment? Bryn looked at the card like it had malfunctioned. Run it again. The clerk ran it again. Declined. Behind her, Peyton and Jackson were already asking about the water park. My mother had lowered herself into a lobby chair. She opened her purse and looked at the card as if it might explain itself. Bryn called me from the front desk. I was standing in the ocean up to my shins, watching Eli jump over a wave. I felt the phone vibrate in my pocket, looked at the screen and pressed decline. She called again. Declined. She called 4 more times in the next 20 minutes. I answered none of them. Not because I was punishing her. Because I was watching my son try to catch a wave with his hands, and it was more important than anything happening in a resort lobby 3 hours north. What followed, according to my mother, was not graceful. Bryn tried her own credit card, the one she'd already charged the $1,400 deposit to. Declined. She was at her limit. She called Marcus, who didn't pick up. She asked my mother if she could transfer money from her savings account. Mom said it would take 2 business days to process a transfer that size. Bryn's voice began to rise. The manager was called. He was polite and firm and not interested in the explanation of whose fault it was. Without full payment, he said they couldn't hold the rooms. He was sorry. He could refund the deposit minus a $300 cancellation fee, per the policy Bryn had agreed to when she booked. Bryn told him the policy was robbery. He smiled and remained unconvinced. My niece Peyton cried in the lobby. Jackson refused to get back in the car. My mother sat in the lobby chair and didn't say anything, which is sometimes the most honest thing she knows how to do. They drove home that same day. For hours. What they said to each other in that car, I don't know. My mother said very little of it when she told me. What she did say was that somewhere on the highway she looked out the window and said, out loud to no one, "We should have just asked her." Bryn didn't respond. I found out Peyton had seen a photo of Cora and Eli on the beach. I'd posted one the evening of day 2. The kids in front of a sandcastle they'd spent 2 hours building and then Eli had accidentally sat on. Peyton had seen it on my mother's phone and asked why they couldn't be there too. When my mother told me this, her voice was different. Not the performance voice. The real one. Small and tired and self-aware in a way she doesn't usually allow herself. I let Bryn tell me what was fair, she said. I don't think I knew what I was agreeing to. You knew you had my card. She was quiet. You knew you hadn't asked me. I know. That was the whole conversation almost. It wasn't forgiveness, it was too early for forgiveness, and I'm not sure I was there yet. But it was honesty. And honesty was somewhere to start. Bryn and I have not spoken since. This happened 3 months ago. I don't know what she's told Peyton and Jackson. I don't know what story she's settled on. Whether I'm the villain in it or whether she's edging toward accountability. I hope she gets there. I genuinely do. Not for my sake but for Peyton and Jackson's, because kids absorb everything and I'd like them to grow up knowing that the way their mother treated my children was not the only way family works. The monthly transfers to my mother have not resumed. She has not asked me to resume them. I don't know if that's growth or pride or something in between. I visit on the last Sunday of each month, bring the kids, stay for lunch, leave before it gets complicated. It's a smaller relationship than it used to be. But it's an honest one, which means right now it might be a better one. I have thought many times about the moment she handed that card to Bryn. About the 3 seconds she must have had, 3 seconds where she could have said I need to ask Natalie first and didn't. I don't know what it cost her to say okay. Whether it was easier than the alternative. Whether she told herself a story that made it feel like something other than what it was. The thing about people who use your kindness as a budget line is that they always have a justification. You owe us. You've been hoarding. You think you're better. The justification shifts the responsibility, turns a theft into a correction, turns their taking into your deserving it. But the math doesn't change. What's yours is yours. And the moment you stop making it available, you find out very quickly who actually cared about you and who was just managing access. I have a letter my father gave me. He'd folded it inside a birthday card he bought and never sent. I found it tucked inside a box of his things that Mom had been meaning to go through. I don't know when he wrote it, but the last line says, "You were never obligated to be everyone's safety net. You chose to be. Don't let them forget the difference." I keep it in the pocket of the jacket I wear most. The paper is soft from being unfolded and refolded 100 times. On the last morning of the trip, Eli found a starfish washed up at the tide line. Alive, small, clinging to a piece of broken shell. He held it very gently, the way kids hold things they understand are fragile, and walked it back into the surf. He stood there until it was gone, carried out by a wave, and then he turned around with the biggest expression on his face. "I helped it," he said. "Yeah," I said. "You did. Some things you hold gently and carry back to safety. Some things you let the ocean take." Cora asked me on the drive home if we could do it again next year. I told her yes, same place if she wanted, or somewhere new if she was feeling brave. She thought about it for 60 miles. "Same place," she said finally. "But maybe longer." "I think so too, baby. Here's what I want to ask you, and I want you to sit with this one before you answer. If someone in your family had spent years treating your finances like a shared account they never contributed to, would you have done what I did? Moved the money, canceled the transfer, let the card decline? Or would you have found a way to explain, negotiate, forgive in advance, keep the peace? There's no wrong answer. But I know which one I made, and I know what it cost, and I know what it gave back. Tell me yours below. Beach balloon. Names and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy. This story is inspired by real events shared online and adapted for storytelling purposes.